Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and today we have a fantastic episode with the Mono White guys, Charles and Dr. Michael LeVine. And we also have a very special guest joining us from CEDH and the Tier 1 Con World Champion, Ken Baumann. And we are going to be discussing his run to win Tier 1 Con in the World Championship there. But also we get into a lot of different conversations, mostly about politics and how that plays into a game of Commander. So there is a lot there. It was like a 2-hour recording session all in all. If you want to hear the entire episode completely uncut and unchanged, you can go head over to our Patreon, and for just as low as $2 a month, you can support us, get access to our Discord, and access to the uncut and unedited versions of the podcast that also include some audio for you as well. So if you want to help out the show, join the Sculpty family, head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors, or just click on the link down in the description as well. We don't have any new Apple Podcast ratings, which sucks, but it is what it is. Next time, I sure hope to have some Apple ratings to read out for you guys. So if you have not already rated us on Apple Podcasts, get on that. I will read out your rating here on the show if you give us 5 stars. Also, before we hop into the episode, I do want to remind you all that I am going to be a featured creator at Oktoberfest here in November. If you aren't familiar with Oktoberfest and the people over at Monarch, it is a charity CEDH tournament raising money for St. Jude Children's Hospital. It is the same people who put on Marchesa, but instead of being in Seattle, it's going to be in Philadelphia. So that is going to be November 18th through the 20th in Philadelphia. And I believe on the 19th that evening, that Friday, we are going to be doing a intro to CEDH panel that is going to include me, Dan from Moderately Anonymous MTG, Lua, and Cam and Dylan from Play to Win. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a great time. And honestly, the entire time I'm at Oktoberfest, I am not even that concerned with playing CEDH that weekend. I have finally built my the Buick dealership cube, which if you're unfamiliar with, I don't know if I've talked about this on the show or not, but I have been working on a cube that is vehicle themed for about a month or two now. And I have finally finished it. It's all sleeved up. It is in my deck box case. I have it all ready to go. And I am going to be trying to recruit anyone and everyone to draft my cube with me. So hopefully we'll be able to do that a couple times over the weekend. And I hope that we also get to get in some great games of CEDH. If you want to learn out more, you're going to want to go to monarch.cards, and you can find out all the information about the event, get your tickets, all that jazz there. With all of that said, let's jump into my conversation with Charles, Dr. Michael LeVine, and your world champion, Ken Baumann. Well, first of all, congratulations on you becoming the, the CEDH World Champ.
Apparently,
Ken Baumann.
Yeah, I guess so. I've been thinking of it as Tier 1 Con 2022's CEDH World Championship winner, you know? So it's like, it doesn't make primary the World Championship thing, but it includes it because to respect the fact that they were like, oh, we'll use it as a marketing thing and whatever.
Yeah.
the more famous thing that we need to really discuss is the fact that we have a television star on our podcast today.
Who? Who is it?
There's this gentleman. His name's Ken Baumann.
I don't trust that guy. He's a liar.
He's
a liar. He lies at CEDH tournaments.
Professionally. He's a professional liar. He got paid to do it.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
What was it? 2008, 2007 when that came out? Was on a little show called The Secret Life of an American Teenager.
This is true. This is what I'm told.
This is what you're told.
Yeah.
And so it is a running joke within the community that a lot of our wives had crushes on you in high school.
I'll take it. It's positive. It's friendly. It sounds good. Thumbs up.
So, Ben, we do have a question for you.
Shoot.
Obviously, dear Sculptybois, when tutoring up a combo or a win con, how does your approach change when using an unconditional tutor where you are not required to reveal what you search for versus a conditional tutor where you do have to search or reveal what you did search for?
Sure.
And that is from Jeremy and Kalamazoo.
Nice. It's a good question, Jeremy.
That didn't rhyme. My bad. I will figure out how to make that rhyme next time.
Okay.
That is an interesting question, though. Like, how is the dynamic of, especially for you in a deck where it's blue-red, so a lot of your tutors are conditional, right?
Yep. I mean, the kind of the nice thing about Mystical Tutor and the like is that the deck has its tracks laid out for it, right? It's got its kind of paths, its most expedient paths to victory. So when I put an early Mystical Tutor on the stack and I'm being proactive about it, it's not going to really be a surprise to anyone that it's going to be like Jessica's Will or whatever, So the deck is familiar enough at this point for the open information tutors to be something that, is just sort of expected. That said, I mean, how you present it does matter, like if I resolve a Mystical Tutor and I put a Jessica's Will, I'm not going to be like Jessica's Will on top, I'll just be like, surprise, surprise, it's Jessica's Will, like I will try to present it casually in some way that isn't deceitful, but that is still downplaying the fact that the card can win the game,
yeah, it's all about that social game, baby.
Exactly. And then the unconditional tutors, I try to lean into the sort of like standard tropish Magic humor of like, what card you get? And be like, oh, the best card, just be like, I'm just got the best card. It's either that or I tell people jokingly all the time. And about 80% of the time it's a joke that I just went and got a command tower, with a wink. Like I'm not actually lying.
About 80%
command tower.
Everyone says they imp seal for land. Everyone says it. Yeah. Everyone always says I imp sealed for land. And I know some people who do it. Yeah.
Which in the dockside days, it's a hard line to maintain, but sometimes you just really do need a second land. But yeah, I would say that open information, anytime you have to reveal a card to an opponent, you can do so in a way where you are still choosing the frame. You are still priming them to understand it in a certain kind of way with a certain kind of tone mentally. So might as well.
Ooh, priming. Priming's a really interesting word choice there. I really like that.
I think you should do what 60 card players do. This is a general suggestion. So often in sideboarding for 60 card players, they put their whole sideboard in their deck and then they remove cards.
Yeah.
Well, so you don't know how many cards they've boarded in. And I often, when I'm tutoring with a reveal tutor, bring a bunch of cards to the top of the deck, look at a bunch of cards, even if I knew what card I was going to get, just so no one is like fully on they're going for the one thing. This is the one thing.
Great.
And
see, I just do that because I never know what I'm going for. So
I mean, sometimes it has changed my mind where I was pretty sure I was going for the one thing. And when I started pulling the cards, then I was like, oh, actually, that was dumb. I should go for this other thing.
But
really usually smart. I do it just as the default to kind of, at a level of hidden information. Was that really what they were going for and what they're not? I actually really think hidden information tutors are scarier because I feel like when you cast them, everyone assumes you're about to go for the win.
Yep.
And against blue-black decks, I always assume if you've detutored or vamp tutored or imp sealed, you have gone for Oracle Consult. And I am very clear to the table that we should assume if they have cast Demonic Tutor and they have 2 blue and a black next turn, that they're going to go for it. And I think that's both, the best play pattern, most likely for you to assume when they have done that in those colors, but also it really shifts the game to focusing on the person who has just detutored.
Yep.
And that's usually good for you if you're not the one who detutored.
Yeah. The unknown is scarier for sure.
Yeah.
And I agree. I feel that way. And so, preying upon that as a social game player that's smart. I'm going to start doing that even with Jessica's Will. Even when it's obvious, I'm going to get 3 things and be like, okay, it's Jessica's Will. Surprise, surprise.
So take us through a little bit about how your experience at Tier 1 Con went. I know you've talked about it on other shows, so we don't need to go too deep in all of that. We'll kind of go in a different direction probably. But, give us a brief rundown for the people who don't consume all CEDH content of how Tier 1 Con went for you.
Tier 1 Con was great. It was 71 players from at least 13 countries by my last count. And it was fun. The players were on the whole respectful, intelligent, responsible players. It was a great experience. I went in not aiming to win, but aiming to play well and learn. And that paired with some good luck led me to win the thing. And that was very unexpected.
Well, when you're playing the best deck in the format, like Blue Farm.
That's true. I mean,
you're obviously going to win.
Blue Farm carried me the whole way. The whole way. I was really just coasting on its structure.
But it's so funny.
I do like what you just said, that you went there to learn. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you on the podcast today was because you chose the deck that you know best over the deck that was considered the best. You still feel like there's room to learn, but you're also probably the one who's learned the most about how to play that deck.
Yeah.
So I feel like, that philosophy is probably a good reason why you did win, because you've sought out how to learn that deck to play it as tightly as possible. Do you feel like there was a ton of points in the tournament where you realized you did something that you only did because you play that deck so much and you identified that path?
Yeah, there were, and thank you for saying that. That's very kind. I hope that that's true. I hope that I'm not sort of like resting on my haunches about how to pilot this deck.
We're not known for our bullshit around here.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. There were a couple moments where I kind of knew like this line that I'm identifying is probably not. Well, I mean, they're just convoluted, right? Like the one that stuck out the most was from an LCQ game, and I went 0-3 during the last chance qualifier on Friday night. So it was not from the win percentage perspective. It wasn't a great night, but there was a line in which I had a Gitaxian probe, and the player before me seemed like they were set up to win. It was my turn, main phase. I revealed from the probed player, which was Blue Farm going after me, they had a Culling the Weak, and they had some 1-drop creature. And all I had available after developing my board was blue mana. And I had my hand packed and an offer you can't refuse. But I couldn't put anything on the stack to offer for more mana to try to then use gamble to filter into red mana to gamble to find a solution. And so I told the player, look, I need you to put that Culling the Weak on the stack so I can, and I walked them through. I said, I've got packed, I've got offer. I need you to Culling the Weak the thing. I need to tap out. I need to respond with pact, and then respond to my own pact, offer it, win the flip, make 4 treasures, and then I have 4 attempts at a gamble. Then I can go find a 1-drop interaction with. And that was a line that I felt really proud of myself for identifying, because it involved collaboration with an opponent. It involved countering my own spells for fun and profit, which I love to do. And it involved, it was like a convoluted out. I knew that I didn't have very many outs, given the table texture and what we sort of saw coming from the player before me. But that was one, and it was the only one at hand, you know, and that's why I most often when I think about CDH, I think less often of that phrase like play to win, and more often of the phrase like play to your outs, you know, because yes, that is subsidiary to playing to win, right? Because the out is the out to like win a game or not lose. But I think that in my mind, that's a much more helpful heuristic when you're at a table, because it's a more playing to your outs is a more holistic concept than playing to win, because oftentimes you do just have to not lose in order to win. And this is why I say this religiously at tables with opponents, just because, I get it. You're playing your deck, which already inclines you to play proactively because you've made choices about what's in it and you've made choices about how it wins, and you sit down with a game plan. So everybody's already prejudiced towards playing to win, right? And not playing the kind of whole situation. But that, hey, we got to not lose in order to win phrase really does kind of wake the table up sometimes and goes like, oh, yeah, okay. We do all collectively have to play to our out sometimes. So yeah, there were a few moments like that.
Yeah, the thing you're talking about, this huge tunnel vision of I have to do my strategy and I don't think about how our strategies work together is like a thing I think you have to, like, the way you get the buy-in for someone to set up these collaborative strategies to stop the game from ending is by being trustworthy. And, with a table of players you don't know, it's a little harder to gain that trust. I think showing people your cards is a very good way to do it. I show cards in my hand. If I want to tell someone like, I want to do this, I need you to do that, I will show them the card that I'm trying to use. Yep. Mikey when I play with him, he'll show you his whole hand. Often he just puts his whole hand down on the table at arbitrary times. Maybe you don't need to do that, but like in order to create these collaborative situations, you need to have some amount of trust established.
Well, think about this. Okay. I'm going to continue to talk about fucking Survivor because it's now a part of my brand just as much as Lavinia, just as much as Arden. It is just as much as Greasefang and Buick's. It's now Survivor's now just part of the brand.
Your brand is very complicated.
It is a very complicated place. But basically what you're describing, though, is a scenario where, in order to get out the big threat and to deal with, like you said, playing to not lose, it's the equivalent of showing somebody in your alliance, hey, I have this immunity idol. Yeah. Hey, I have this, advantage that they can get throughout the games that allows me we can flip this vote on this person and we can survive through this another week or really another day. And it's one of those things where I don't think enough people think about it. I've been told that I am wrong in looking at Commander as a game of Survivor, but the reality, in my opinion, is that you have to be willing to collaborate in order to succeed. I mean, not to be like brash or anything, but I mean, two of the best players you know what? I'm just going to list off who I think are like four of the most successful people in CEDH, just like across the board. Yeah. It's Killstars, it's Ian, it's Reed, Sick Robot, and it's Spleenface. You know what all four of those are really good at doing? They're really good at communicating with the table.
Yeah. This is something that I noticed about politicking because we have a friend, his name is Everyone, and he often talks about how crucial politicking is. And I told Everyone, I'm actually pretty similar to some of these tournament grinders. I don't like politicking. I don't really like telling people do this or I'm going to blow this up. And I'm actually of a similar disposition as Mikey. I would just be you talk too much, shut up and play cards, right? And for me, though, what I do is make tactical impetus. So when it comes to politicking and stuff, I don't politic in terms of using language or rhetoric to convince people. Occasionally, I will highlight something being hey, this person can add NOS at the end of your turn, or can demonic consultation at the end of your turn. and they already scryed a card to the bottom of their deck, right? So they know what the last card is, right? And that could be Bad News Bears for you, or something like that, right? Like just highlight certain things that are obvious. But I don't think I typically like hold like a sword of Damocles over their head. Like if you don't do this, I will, counter your spell or something like that. I don't really go to that type of territory.
I honestly don't see it that often. Do you?
No,
I don't. But like, I think that like in terms of like, we need definitions. And I think that people oftentimes have different ideas for what politicking actually means. And this is a thing that like everyone had pointed to me, because I never thought of what I did was politicking, but everyone was like, no, that is actually a form of politicking. It's a tactical politicking. You could have played XYZ stacks piece, but you chose to play stacks piece alpha instead, right? And the reason why is because you believe that this would motivate other people to make different decisions instead, right? Even though you didn't say anything.
I mean, everything you do in a game of Commander is inherently political, whether everything down from your commander choice to the way in which you sequence your cards to the cards you play in your deck to when you are holding your cards, how you're holding your cards. Literally everything you do in a game of Commander is inherently political. Yes. And you cannot remove that. Like you can in 1v1, you don't really have that as much. It's more of like I'm trying to outwit you, but instead you need to be able to collectively get 3 or at least 2 people to not like.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that, right? Like when you bluff in 1v1, you're only bluffing to one person. And so there's very little political interaction. But when you're bluffing to one person and you also have to simultaneously bluff to the other 2 players, you're presenting different information in terms of like the same face at the same time. And it's a different perspective because of what information like 3 people have gathered. There was a post about this from Drake that I commented back about the product sum problem. And this is a really good math problem that if everybody knows about like the 100 prisoners problem and watch like Veritasium, at some point I know that the big wigs of math will catch up to this on their YouTube channel, but you heard this first. So, this will be, so you guys can try to answer this in the comments, or we could just include this as like a bonus Patreon or whatever. But essentially, let's say like Ken and Michael are 2 participants in this game, and they have to guess what the numbers X and Y are. And so Ken knows the sum of X and Y. Michael knows the product of X and Y. Okay. We know that X and Y, this is the given information. We know that X and Y are not equal to each other, that they are positive integers, right? Greater than 1, and that their sum is less than 100.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
So Ken, knowing the sum, tells Michael, or just says out loud, like, I don't know what X and Y is, but I do know that Michael does not know what X and Y is, right? Michael, knowing the product, then says, oh, well, based on what you've just said, I now know what X and Y is. And as soon as he says that, Ken then says, oh, okay, all right, I now know what X and Y is. And at this point, everyone should actually know what X and Y is, including the audience. So what is X and Y? Right. And I'll let you guys figure that out. There's a Wikipedia article about this, so you can Google this if you give up. But essentially, this is the same thing that happens in Commander, where you have multiple parties, right? And depending on how intelligent or how informed they are of a certain deck in the meta, or a certain person's play patterns, they will derive different information based on some other player's game action. And one person might know more than the other. And that's a political thing, actually, right? If you know what the other person knows, right, you're playing off of hidden information that's not actually communicated to 2 other people, right? And that can, to you or from me, is a form of collaboration, but that's even way more subtle because it goes beyond spoken language. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If Michael and I are playing at a table, there are certain things that I know about Michael's nuances that I can piggyback off of, and Michael can piggyback off of me. Yep. And we've done this to Hire, and Hire never wants to play with us ever again. Right. and like, yeah, it is like that. Like, politicking and tactical decision making and game theory can be taken to the next level, but we don't necessarily see it that way. And I think that while people are very hung up right now about the whole politics and lying thing, there's this whole like cornucopia of like a deeper knowledge about competitive commander playing that, you know, we haven't really gotten to yet.
I have a claim that might be outrageous. I want to know what you think. Choosing to play Kark Sharkashima is inherently political because you add another layer of stochasticity to the game, which makes assessment purposely difficult for your opponents and allows you to downplay your play patterns in the early game very well.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I say as much in the primer. I essentially have made the argument from day one that like this is a deck against which it is impossible to play optimally 100% of the time because we don't even know what the hell is going to happen. Yep. So there is an unknown unknown. You know, there are probabilities and you can guess, but you don't know for sure. So you always have to interact in a way in which you are guessing at a state of affairs rather than knowing by looking at the stack and just saying, there's a silence, there's a counterspell, underneath is a Naz, or on top is a Naz. Like that's all known. There's nothing else to be revealed. And because of the dumb old coin flips, it really does add a layer of randomness to the table that causes me to describe the deck as psychological stacks. I mean, it and particularly for players who aren't familiar with it, it exhausts people's capacities to evaluate their plays against it. And it does so, I think, in a way that is more pronounced than most other decks. I would say that, again, the closest equivalent are stacks decks that are able to layer effects quickly, like Winota. Because there's what is hidden in Kark is analogous to what is explosive in Winota, right? Lots of things happen at once. And a player is made to make decisions based on multiple variables that all emerge, not over, you know, a few turns, but in the span of a single counter war or whatever. And
Winota is a really good example because it actually has that randomness though too.
Exactly.
Where like you really don't know what's going to come off Winota. I dislike playing against Winota because it's hard to know what stacks piece is coming next. Yeah. And there's always another one or multiple ones coming. Yep. And that really complicates planning. Exactly.
And one thing I wanted to note, sort of going back to the idea of like, I don't know, I'm a simpleton at heart. I'm a Midwestern salesman, used car salesman at heart, or a cult leader, you know, like my path could have gone two diverging ways. And I definitely didn't want to do cult leader. So I was like, oh, we'll just stick with the salesman and actor thing. But I think that there are essentially two archetypal futures for CDH as a social game. One is one in which game theory sort of prevails and people get real nerdy about it and start thinking, you know, people start working on puzzles like the product sum problem and being like, okay, this is how to play this 4-player free-for-all singleton game optimally. The other future, and the one in which I'm hitching my wagon to, is the what I like to think of it is sort of the crude political future in which there are a handful of heuristics that one can adopt to play the game better than most players. And most of them are just simple social and psychological tactics. And where a person resides, there, you know, is up to them, right? You're going to play to your strengths. You're going to play to what makes more sense to you. And that means that I can see sort of two natural enemies maybe emerging in the future in terms of player archetypes. One is the thoughtful, more quiet, less, well, I'll just say political here, although that term, again, I want to talk about it in the future. Less political kind of a loaded
player. Term.
Yeah, it is something, particularly in American culture. It comes with all of this baggage that it really makes it muddy to understand. And, or they will be pitted against the player who talks. The Reeds and the Kens of the world, you know, where we're just, we're talking, we're reading the table, we're doing stuff with our bodies a lot. And I think that that's probably what's going to shake out, as it has in other social games, right? Like Diplomacy and Catan, and it's very similar. You have the
poker.
What was
that?
that?
Those personalities poker, too. Like poker.
Yep, exactly. The shades on, the hoodie closed, the like I'm playing, I'm reading, I'm thinking about the river, and then the Daniel Negreanu's who are just blah, 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 you know, like a million miles a minute and being disruptive, right? And guiding the table's attention. In my mind, Commander is fundamentally a social game. That doesn't mean that sociality means one thing for everybody, right? I'm not being prescriptive, but it is in the format's DNA, right? And that means that it's in the DNA of CDH. It's in the DNA of casual. It's all the same format. So in my mind, players, if they feel able to, and if they're comfortable doing so, are leaving a lot of money on the table if they are not playing the game from the second they sit down at the table. From a competitive perspective, if you're playing casual, do whatever you want. Mulligan to 3 lands and just, you know, make silly stuff happen. But if you're playing competitively, you might as well play the social game, because that's what it is, from the second the game begins, or even before the game begins, because why not? Again, it's free real estate. It's just there for you. So you might as well capture it.
This is why I said on Twitter, if someone blatantly lies in a game I'm in and I'm in a game with them again, her game action is saying this person lies. Everyone should know that this person lies. And it's part of the game, because they're going to try to get people's trust, and people should know that, you know, they do this. You shouldn't be taking advantage.
And I agree completely.
I mean, and again, like, you know, I know, again, like, that's a thing that happens on Survivor too. And you like people have won and lost Survivor because of that, where they'll get to the end, they'll get to the jury, and they're answering the jury, and the jury's like, you lied straight to me, my face. You swore on your children. Was it worth it? And the way they are able to answer that question has won and lost people $1 million. So like, when people discount the whole social thing and discount the Survivor comparison, I'm like, I'm sorry. It's actually a competitive game. I hate to break your burst your bubble here.
It's a degree. It's a matter of degrees, right? Like Commander is less social than Survivor, which has its mechanical challenges. But I think that maybe some Magic players, because of the complexity of the mechanical challenges and restrictions that every game presents, discount the social possibilities of the game. The social possibilities are limitless. The sky is the limit, or rather, the sky isn't a limit. Like you can, using your words, free action, doesn't require tapping any lands, doesn't use the stack. You can get a lot done, but you also have to understand thoroughly and play well. Arguably the most complicated card game that humans have.
That's why
it's tough.
Sorry. But that's why I like the comparison to Survivor so much, is because in order to be good at Survivor, you have to, one, be good at the physical side of the game.
Yeah, it's true.
Which is winning challenges and all that stuff, but also like fucking surviving in the wilderness.
Yeah. It's a balance of both skill and social finesse.
Yeah.
And that's much like kind of
Commander.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I try to get at with this comparison is you like, in order to go on Survivor, you have to be physically capable of going on the show, right? And in order to be successful at CEDH, you have to be like at a certain level of competency in order to really be successful at minimum. And then you add the social layer on top of that. And that's when you decide how it goes. It's not one and not the other. It's both those things together.
You can't get
but it
away
should
with
be,
one, not the other.
It's important to note. So like, part of that is playing a good deck, right? So like you can come with the wrong equipment to a CDH match and it'll be very hard to win no matter how good you are at Magic or how good you are at the social aspect. That being said, if I go back to the picking Kark and not Blue Farm, I think that the choice of the deck is a lot wider than people think. You just need a deck that plays good cards and has a plan. And
Michael and I have talked about this. We talked about this from like day one about like picking the deck that is best suited for you. Like it doesn't have to be because this was in response to like the whole tier list video that that the Mind Sculptors did at the beginning, and you were like, I don't think Heliod is like C tier or whatever, right? And we went over this fact of like what makes a deck S tier right? And Michael and I had talked about this fact, and you guys just go back and watch the tier list videos. Just give us more views or whatever. But
don't worry, they're already doing it. It's our most viewed video every month.
Yeah, but like what we talked about was this fact of like, look, at a certain point, the tier list just doesn't matter anymore. The tier list was designed for in terms of like player compatibility. Ian did this in his monocolored deck tier list video of like which deck is the most easiest to pilot and has a stronger win potential because it's also easier to pilot as well. And Michael and I talked about like at a certain point, it doesn't really matter how easy it is to pilot anymore. It matters more of like, can you pilot it well?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does. I mean, it certainly seems like, speaking from the sort of CEDH.guide perspective, it seems like there is very little that we can know conclusively about the tournament CEDH meta. The one thing that stands out to me, and something that I think about a lot, and sort of disparage over, to be honest, even though I love blue, is that it does really seem like there's a very strong positive correlation between playing blue and placing well in tournaments. And if you're not playing blue, you are, it seems, at least from my perspective, you are giving yourself an additional challenge. And this makes, I think this makes sense historically, right? Paying attention to type 1 and beyond. Like, blue is the best color at stopping things on the stack and protecting things on the stack. And it turns out that's where a lot of you know, CEDH players' life takes place in, right? That's the domain. But beyond that, I think it's the Wild West. And I think that, Michael, what you argued on Twitter and what hopefully I helpfully elucidated earlier this year, right, was like the statistical picture is grim in terms of trying to make decisions about what is optimal from the perspective of playing a certain deck in a given meta. Unless you know the meta like the back of your hand, unless it's very peculiar, you know, unless it's skewed in one direction and not another. We're just sort of flailing around to some extent past a certain sort of set of deck building principles, you know. But even still, you have decks that are mechanically the most anomalous. Some, you know, for like Anya, that is the deck with the most unique cards relative to the CEDH card pool, and Anya has placed in tournaments before. So even then, even within the range of like deck building principles, there's some wiggle room. So what I feel like as a competitive player is in my control is enjoying what I play so that I play it more and play it better. That's one thing. Designing something so that I know it from the ground up and I'm not just adopting it and learning its play patterns, but I understand the reasoning and the interconnectivity of all the game pieces. And then playing the social game and playing it well. And then the fourth thing, which is ultimately the most important thing, at least from my perspective in a tournament setting, is being a nice person, right? Being a person with whom your opponents want to play with again, because commander is commander in my mind. And like, if I wanted to go, you know, again, pull down the hoodie and the glasses and lie effectively and win money, I'd still be playing poker, but I'm not doing that anymore.
Looking to protect your cards? Check out our sponsor, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield sleeves are the only sleeves I trust to protect my cards because they have just the perfect mix of durability and shuffleability. I have been using their petrol matte sleeves on all my cards for almost 5 years now, but the good folks over at Dragon Shield sent me some of their new dual matte sleeves to try out, and let me tell you, I think I'm in love. These new dual mattes have a fully opaque black interior, so not only are they not see-through on the back, but they really make your cards look really nice against that black backdrop. You can use our affiliate link in the description below to get your Dragon Shield dual matte sleeves today, while also supporting the channel. Thanks again to Dragon Shield for supporting the Mind Sculptors. Thank you to all of our wonderful patrons. Your continued support is what enables us to continue to bring you quality CEDH content every single week. If you want to listen to next week's Brewer's Choice episode featuring Cobblepot, Ian, and special guest Surreal, you can now become a patron for as low as $2 a month and get to check out the full uncut video episode right now. You will also get access to our patron exclusive Discord server, plus the ability to submit a question to our Dear Sculptybois segment. So if you aren't a patron already, you can join the Sculpty family at patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors.
I think that like for players, they should actually understand certain like social nuances. Yeah, sure, play to your win, but realize where you're at. Right, when you're in Rome and you're not doing what the Romans are doing, you might get executed.
Well, Ken, you may feel this way, because I do feel this way when I play in a pod where I'm the stack.
Yeah,
everyone's come to the table to do their thing fast and to use the same axis. They're trying to dockside. They're trying to cast multiple spells, and I'm like, I'm here for turn 1 Root Maze, turn 2 Aethersworn Canonist. Like, let's go. And you're a Roman. You're in Rome, but you're not a Roman, right? And it's like there's an adversarial feel at the beginning, and I do feel like at the beginning of those games, I really do have to try to get on people's good side, because they're gonna hate me the minute I cast my first spell. And I mean, with Krark, I see the groans when people see a Krark at the table. And how do you try to like ease people into the fact that they're not going to know what's going on for a huge portion of the game?
Well, I mean, I have maybe a twofold answer to that. One answer is during the game, if opponents are asking game mechanical questions, or if they're asking questions about the stack, which I try to represent visually with 100% fidelity, I will answer those questions happily, gladly. I'll explain, like, I'm not trying to get somebody. I'm not trying to get a win from a gotcha. I don't understand how Krark works. I gladly will explain all of that, because it's just mechanically a hard thing to grok the first time you encounter it, I think, for most folks. And the stack is the hardest thing to visualize in the game. And so I don't want to win because somebody lost track of something on the stack, and I don't want to win because somebody doesn't understand what happens when a Krark trigger resolves. So I'm happy to educate because I like playing the deck. And so talking about how it works is fun. It's talking about how, you know, the car I tuned up, like what choices I made under the hood. It's the same principle for me. But if I sit down and there are groans because people know what's coming, to me, that's a more challenging thing to address, because the person who doesn't know, I think that once you sort of explain the machine, at least how it works, they might feel frustrated because they don't beat it, but they're not going to feel frustrated intellectually. They'll feel like, okay, like, wow, that's a tough puzzle to solve, but I could solve it, but this time I didn't, and that sucks. Or I don't like solving this puzzle. Like, you know, I would rather not try to solve it in the future. Fine and good. But if I sit down at a table and, you know, my ideal situation, my dream is always playing against 3 mid-range decks. I just want to play against mid-range all day, every day. That's my dream come true. And so if I see Timon Thracia, Timon whatever, I'm just like, I'm in hog heaven. And they typically now, mid-range players, I think, have or are slowly wising up to the fact that Krark Sakashima can be a tough matchup, because it turns out I can use my disruption a lot better than they can. They only get to do it once, and that's their cross to bear. I get to maybe and hopefully do it multiple times, and that can be really frustrating. But what I tried to do is, again, make sure that I'm leading with myself as a person rather than myself as a deck player first. Like, I will, you know, I ask names, I ask pronouns, I introduce myself, I try to make sure that everybody's feeling good before the game begins. I say, good luck, have fun, right? Like all of the just sort of standard housekeeping stuff that I would do anyway. I make sure to really, really try to countervail their upset feelings that they're displaying, right? I try to countervail their frustration. And I also, I have more and more often told players, like, hey, if you know this deck well, right, it's not the most complicated thing in the world. Like, it has its, you can throw a wrench in the machine. And maybe I won't tell you that right now in a tournament setting, but like, I have advocated publicly in multiple different forums on how to beat this deck. It's not rocket science. It's just a Magic deck. You can beat it. It takes certain paths and you can disrupt them. It's not, you know, it's not like Magic. It's not arcane.
Spoiler alert. if you respond to the card that they're casting before any of the triggers go off,
they won't get it back.
They won't get it back, and that usually does the thing.
Absolutely.
This is your PSA.
It took me losing on
destroy
stream.
Krark.
Yeah, kill Krark. I have tech for Krark in Rocco now, and it's kill Krark tech.
It is. I mean, there is good kill Krark tech out there. Like he's just a little tutu. He's not a big scary boy.
Turns out a lot of cards deal 2 damage.
But this is okay. No, please don't run the can't be countered one. Please don't run it. Volcanic Fall. I hate all the pyroclasm effects so much, but they're good. They're so good, and they're good against the deck.
One of the things that I do think is important, though, as we talk about this, is it kind of talks about like threat assessment in some ways. And I think that's relevant in this discussion. I think a good example is a person who plays in my local meta is a big Kinnan player. And I play against Pongo. I've played against Kinnan a lot. And I am the poster child for, hey, we should remove the kitten. Hey, we should remove the kitten. Hey, do you have removal? Because we should probably remove the kitten. Hey, they just drew another card. They probably they tutored. It's probably a basalt monolith. I think we're probably going to die. Nobody ever listens to me. And then we always lose to kitten. And he just won our league last season. And I fought with Kinnan. And I looked at everybody and I was like, will you listen to me now? Kill Kinnan.
Yep. I mean, and that's something I feel like that conversation, I very frequently when I sit down at a pod, based on the pod composition, we'll just start talking about the folks' decks and asking questions, or just being like, oh, like Blue Farm, and somebody be like, yeah, whatever. And usually they're not that dismissive, but you know what I mean? Like just sort of sussing out the table. And also, again, you get to choose how you present information. And so when I am sitting in a pod that has 2 or 3 turbo decks, that's always a rough one. I will gladly say often, like, I can't win with 3 mana out of nowhere. I just can't. Like, you will see this train leave the station. It doesn't teleport. It takes some time, gets on its rails, it chugs, and then it's hard to interact with, but you'll see it leave the station. And I also talk frequently about like, okay, like there's 5 mana, that's an ad nauseum. I have 5 mana, I have control 1 commander and maybe can cast Jessica's Will. Good, but I have to flip a damn coin. I don't just draw 40 cards, again, you get to pick how you present your deck to the table, and you get to, don't just let other people's threat assessment stand. You can modify it. You can influence. You can draw attention away from yourself and towards the other player's decks. And you're not being socially toxic or whatever. You're just playing a social game. And as long as you're doing it nicely and respectfully and not being, not saying ad hominem stuff, not being rude, not being dismissive of people or like talking down to them or dismissing their comments, people will be fine with it. And it even sometimes charges the game positively. People get a little kind of like a little tit for tat, like people will kind of fight back, and then it becomes this like little war of words a little bit. And that can enrich people's experience and not just detract from the game.
I mean, and one of the things that I think, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but I'm saying it to you now, Charles, is one of the things that I've kind of always thought is, if you were like constantly talking during that finals match, I think your odds of winning that finals match would have gone up significantly. Because if you just sit there the entire, like every time it's somebody's turn, hey, don't forget about the Magda. Hey, don't forget about the Magda. Hey, don't forget about this. And it's one of those things where, in my opinion, especially when you're playing stacks, you have to sit there and be like, if you are playing stacks, I think you need to be the most vocal person at the table.
I don't know.
But the reason is because other people's misplays will lose you games more often than it will when you're playing a combo deck.
Look, I wish there was audio that you guys could have heard, because I clearly explained to Kyle, what would happen if Suppression Field got blown up. And Ryan's analysis was that yeah, you did explain to him. I understood exactly what you said to him. I think that he, however, it just completely went over his head, right? I think from my point of view, I think it honestly was like just a toss up. Like, I don't think I could have convinced Kyle any other way. He had a boatload of cards in his hand, and the one thing that was stopping him from winning was that suppression field. And so this is kind of like what Michael was saying, like, you know, you can get very tunnel visioned into the idea of winning, right? And so, yeah, I was being communicative. I do believe that if you are, there's a certain level of being vocal that I just don't particularly like. And you'll notice this with me when I play, that if you start talking a lot, I might actually just decide to kill you first. It's not because I suspect that you have something. It's just usually what I find is that when people start talking, this goes back to like the product sum problem. And I'm not saying that like I'm incredibly smart or anything like that, but I found this often in my case that I actually end up knowing what you have and what you're capable of. If you continue talking, and I end up deriving like the whole entirety of information from your hand and then plot out like the next 5 turns based on everything that you said that came out of your mouth. And not only that, I can also begin to figure out when you're bluffing about things that are untrue versus things that are true based on what game actions you've now taken in the course of 3 turns as well. And I'm not talking about like 3 turn cycles. I'm talking about like 3 player turns, right? So I will find out in like within a single turn cycle what you're up to as well. So this is the reason why I'm very delicate about what I say to people.
Well, my point mostly is, especially as the stacks player, I feel like as the stacks player, it's like every turn, it's like, hey, this thing is here. Don't forget about this. Hey, this thing is here. I know you have a bunch of cards. I know you're trying, you think you can win, but I'm telling you, that's right there. Hey, don't forget about this. And it's just like
people can turn against you. Like in MLC, when I was playing Wild Pile, Timmy was on Godot, and he has presenting multiple wins. And every time any game action was being taken, I was trying to articulate to everyone how Timmy could win if we did this wrong. Timmy knew that he just needed one person to make one mistake to win. And he constantly said, don't let Mike talk you into these things. Mike, you don't need to explain this to them. They're good. They know what they're doing. Because he knew, you know, if we didn't talk through everything, eventually he would have his way in to win. And it worked. I think there's also that's a real strategy that you open yourself up to if you talk too much.
Yeah. Well, but then it's also important when Timmy says that to point that out of he's doing that because he doesn't want us to talk this through. He wouldn't be saying something if he didn't want us to talk about it. You know what I mean?
And again, I don't, and this is a very distinct thing about how I play Magic that I think might align more with like the pro players or the tournament grinders who talk about this, because I don't even go down that territory. I don't even I don't buy into the rhetoric of saying like, look, I know you think you can win, but you can't. Like, I don't even begin my sentences with that. I'd be like, okay, this person has, I state out things that like I observe, like, okay, this person has done X, Y, Z. I believe that they have this interaction in their hand. I believe that they are capable of doing this, right? I believe that you are capable of doing this, but I don't ever go as far as to make the, descriptive statement of saying, I believe you think that you can win this game and you're going to go for this move next turn. I state enough information where honestly, I let people interpret that what they will. Like I told you all the premises and axioms that I believe to be true. And I believe that you, the human individual, could piece A plus B together and then figure out what your conclusion is. And I believe,
see, the difference is that you ultimately think that people are smart, and I ultimately think that people are stupid.
No,
I don't think it's either. People just make mistakes.
Yeah,
right. They just make simple mistakes. It doesn't matter how smart or stupid you are in the game. It's very complicated. It's easy to make a mistake.
Well, the thing for me is that I actually state this information and then observe what they do next off of that given information. Because if it doesn't align to what I believe that they're going to do, it actually tells me more about things that I might not have known and be like, oh, okay, if they already now know this information that I presented to them. I have stated it. They've heard it. Once again, it's the product sum problem, right? I've given them information that they didn't have before, even though it seems very innocuous. Like I stated it in a very obvious fact. But by stating the obvious fact, I've made them acknowledge that this fact is on the table now, that they know what I know. And now when they act on that premise and they act differently than what I expect them to act, I now also know something additional on top of that. Yeah. And then I can prepare my counterplay to that. And as a stacks player, that is very crucial because unlike other stacks players is like, hey, don't blow up my stacks piece. I already am anticipating what you're deciding to blow up, and I'm already preparing the countermeasure for it if I have it. Because the thing about like things like a rule of law game is that you can only play one spell a turn, or like you can't play everything from your hand because you're limited on resources. And so for me, deciding what is the best resource to play and anticipating, you know, what the next three players are doing in that turn cycle becomes very important. And that's how I actually fish out information. It's very innocent in just stating the obvious, but then seeing what people do once everyone has acknowledged what you've stated, and there is no dispute about the truth of that matter, right? Of your interpretation of that reality, and then they act upon it, you now have a very good radar and scope of what things are going to happen now, because there is no discrepancy in that interpretation of reality.
Sure. I mean, one thing that comes to mind that I want to make sure to mention, because I feel like it is both my responsibility to mention this as a Magic player, but also his responsibility to mention it as like a person in a nation state or whatever. Like, I think that every used car salesman loves customers. Every used car salesman has a strategy to sell people a car who think they're smarter than them. This is standard salesman behavior. People fall into psychological tropes because we're products of our environment, and our environment is massively influenced by cultural pressures and norms and blah, 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 right? So the person who walks into the car dealership and going, I'm too rational, I'm too logical, this person is not going to get me. Car salesmen can sell them cars all day. And so I just don't, I don't want commander players and CDH players in tournament settings to think that they won't fall prey to good salesmanship, because good salesmanship works because people are impressionable. And further, in a social environment in which social pressure is immediately felt, social pressure immediately has effects and consequences. A lot of people will just be affected, and walls and barriers, and you know, it's the Mike Tyson thing, right? Everybody's got to play until they get punched in the face, and playing a social game is socially punching people in the face, right? That's the point. You're supposed to disrupt people's attention. And so I just want to make sure that the listeners out there who don't feel like wait, there's only one way to play this game. I have to be like ultra reasonable and ultra rational in order to not fall prey to social tricks. You can get got to. Everybody can get sold a car. It's just everybody can get sold a car. So just don't.
Sometimes you just gotta have a little chaos going on.
Exactly.
Secret insider info from somebody who used to work at a car dealership. The people who come in and think that they know the most are the easiest to sell.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I would say that I think that, I mean, maybe what this conversation is driving me to is the conclusion that like playing tournament CDH well is more like doing a complicated magic trick well than it is like playing chess well. It requires manipulating attention by way of doing something very skillful, like skill testing. And I think that like, exactly, the CDH is about attention. The game is about attention. We play with the magic cards because they capture our attention and we like them, and when we think they're cool and the art's nice, and that we like white cards, we like red cards or whatever. But really, you can make or break a game based on who paid attention to what and how much attention did they pay and what kind of attention was it. And that's it. That's all we're doing here. Yeah. And I think that maybe that's how I like to think about the game, because mechanically I like Magic in general. I could play all sorts of decks. Like Magic is cool. I like all sorts of formats and stuff. Like it's all good. But CDH or social games generally have always kept my attention incredibly well because of that fact that this is all about sort of what people are looking at and what you can make people look at and what people can make you look at and the interplay between those two contrary desires, you know, and the chance that something pops up that's unexpected draws everybody's attention from just the mechanical complexity or statistical complexity of the game or the tournament structure or whatever.
Well, that about wraps things up for us here this week. Thank you to Ken Baumann for taking the time to sit down with us. It was a great conversation, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode. If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to rate the show on whatever podcast platform you are on. And if you are listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments what your thoughts were on today's show and today's conversation. Also, would like to thank our top tier patrons, Justin, Adam Hamden, David Snavely, Dionysius, Jason Bialek, Josh Stein, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you too would like to support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors or check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.